Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and this is going to be a personal case study of mine of knee pain with Olympic weightlifting. So I'm going to basically go through the process of how I developed knee pain and then what I did to modify my training and continue to progress while going through this injury, and then how I relieved the pain. So just a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to give medical advice in this presentation, and this is not intended to be medical advice. I'm simply just reviewing the process of what happened, of how I incurred the injury, and then how I continued to train, and then got over the injury. So this might have some sort of practical benefit for people in a similar situation, but it is not intended to be any medical advice. So the causes of the pain. Basically, I did a competition and a weightlifting competition in November of 2017, and I was not planning on peaking for this competition, so I was going relatively heavy, but I was not intending to be at my best. So essentially, after that competition, I decided to try sort of a new training style where I would normally have prescribed intensities post-competition, and then focus on reducing the intensity and then slowly accumulating volume, which is sort of in that classic periodization model. And that's what I had planned. However, the new training style, I was basically trying to use the exercise to determine the intensity rather than prescribe specific intensities. So as I was doing this new sort of training style, I was either not experienced enough or I got quite strong quite quickly. But the point is that I was still lifting. I started to lift, 90% plus of weights with my weightlifting without really any break. So while I wasn't intending to, I still continued to train at a very high intensity, which over a prolonged period of time, I probably was not adapted to that. So essentially I just started to get some knee pain that slowly emerged, and it wasn't bad, but it didn't really go away. I also started getting some low back pain, which I have another video on this channel about if you want to check out. They both basically happened at the same time, but this presentation is going to focus on the knee pain. And also, I videoed myself in all my weightlifting and other exercises, and I had no signs of poor movement. So there was nothing in my movement that I could see that could be the cause of this pain, both back and knee. So the nature of the pain, basically I had pain after exercises, so maybe a few hours after. So if I did the exercises and then sat down for a bit, and then I got up from sitting down, I could feel some pain in my knee. And essentially it just got worse over time. So it didn't really get better. It didn't get too much worse, but over time it started to sort of just be more and more apparent through everyday activities. So it could potentially be some sort of patellar tendonitis, but I'm not going to give a specific diagnosis, but that's what I would basically think that would be related to, because the exercises that basically caused pain were exercise with a stretch shortening cycle, which heavily involves the tendon. So that was my thought process behind that, but I'm not going to give a clinical diagnosis. So training contraindicators. So what caused pain? Essentially anything really with heavy loading. So I had symptoms after things like heavy squats, snatches, cleans and jerks. So not directly after, but more again like the hours after. And then if I had to ever run or jump or do any sort of plyometrics, the symptoms were immediately apparent. However, if I did pause squats instead of regular squats, or I did pauses in the bottom of my weightlifting movements, then I didn't actually have the pain either. So that's basically more to that, what I was going through, that thought process with the stretch shortening cycle. It likely would have been some sort of tendon issue. So the training modifications I did to work around this injury, so reduced all stretch shortening cycle exercises, or as much as I could while still being relieved. So I did more of the power variation, so power snatches and power cleans and that sort of thing, because that doesn't have that stretch shortening cycle component that bounce out of the bottom. So I did a lot more power variations. And I initially wore knee sleeves as well to take some of that loading off the joint and more into the elastic of the knee sleeves, which did help the symptoms, but it meant that sort of I wasn't adapting at all, and I couldn't really train without the knee sleeves, which I didn't want to do. I wanted to get back to training, to being able to train without knee sleeves. So then I sort of took them off after a while and stopped using them. I replaced squatting movements with pause squats. So any sort of squat movement I had, I just did them with a pause variation. So I'll do pause squats or pause front squats or whatever, instead of bouncing out of the bottom. And I also lightened the load and focused on volume accumulation rather than high intensity squatting movements. This was a really key one and probably had the biggest impact, because basically after immediately doing this, I had lots of relief from my knee pain. I basically did introduce eccentric overload leg extension training. So on the leg extension, I would go up with 2 legs as heavy as I could, and then take one leg off and lower down as slow as I possibly could with one leg, or for about 3 to 5 seconds on the way down, which had an overload component on each leg, which really relieved symptoms. Basically, the week I started doing it, my symptoms were reduced a lot. So additional treatments, what worked and what didn't work. So what was unsuccessful was sort of stretching of the quads or the iliotibial band. Didn't really provide any help. And successful treatments, self-massage, so like foam rolling, that sort of thing. I guess it's very similar to stretching, but that seemed to provide a little bit of at least temporary relief. So self-massaging the quads, the iliotibial band, and the hip flexors provided some relief, whether that was just temporary, probably was, but I don't think it actually treated the issue. It just sort of helped temporarily feel a bit better. So it didn't really change the long-term outcome. So the take-home points for this presentation are that sudden changes in volume or intensity or in your training can cause overuse injury if the tissues haven't adapted to that sort of training. So just like what I did, I would normally only do very short periods of high intensity training and then back the intensity off. So my body was only used to that. But then prolonging that high intensity training was quite a big shock and a stress to the body, which I wasn't adapted to, and obviously caused pain and injuries. So make sure to be patient with your recovery. So this whole process took around 5 months to actually go from creating the pain, from the pain being at the worst, and then to relieving the pain. So make sure you're patient with your recovery and don't rush it, otherwise you're going to make it worse. And use this time that you have with this injury to forget about being at your peak, and focus on the process of still progressing in some way and making sure you're still getting better. You're not going to do nothing. You can always find modifications in your training to continue to progress in some way. And make sure when you find these modifications to your training, they don't aggravate the symptoms. Make sure you do modifications that relieve the symptoms and allow your body to heal. Again, find additional treatments that relieve pain. So whether that's some sort of stretching, foam rolling, could be some sort of breathing drills, that sort of thing. But find some sort of treatment that can relieve pain, even if it's just temporary. I mean, you don't want to temporarily relieve pain and then continue to do training that's going to aggravate you. You don't want to do that. But I guess if you're making sure you're still changing and modifying your training, especially training load, you can still do those treatments to give some temporary relief so you can actually still get by. And again, probably the most important thing, see a medical professional if you are unsure, or if you want a quicker recovery, or you're not finding any relief with your injury, see a medical professional. They'll be able to do it a lot quicker and a lot more efficient for you, because that's their profession. And preferably see someone with some practical experience, at least maybe in the sport or similar to the sport that you play, because they're going to actually understand and empathize with you about what the injury is, and understand that you want to get back to playing sport rather than just being able to function with daily tasks. So you can see the website clinicalathlete.com. Essentially, this is going to be a website where everyone on there, it's like a collection of practitioners who have practical sport experience, so they're not just your everyday physiotherapists or physical therapists. That's it for this presentation, guys. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of it. You can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and on Instagram with the links here and the links down below in the description box. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe on YouTube to stay up to date with the latest informative videos. So on Facebook and Instagram, you can find these pictures, which are basically research infographics. So they're the latest research in sports performance training, and they're basically all the information is summarized into these pictures, so you can stay up to date with the latest research without actually having to go into the journals themselves and read through the entire article. So this is basically a short snippet that gives you an overview of all the latest research happening in sports performance training. So thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully you got something out of this presentation.